Welcome to Nell and Matt's Obsolete Movies, the podcast where we revisit our 20 plus years of collecting. It's probably now close to 30. It's 19, it's 20, 25. The 30 years of collecting films on obsolete formats. You can think of this podcast as being about films from the VHS era, though we do not necessarily always watch them on VHS.
Yep.
Our film for this episode is Strange Days from 1995, and we watched it on VHS, getting the Movietown copy from Movietown. That's Movietown at 80 Cloverleaf Plaza, Van Buren, Arkansas. Or Arizona. Wait. AZ is AR is Arkansas, right?
AZ is Arizona.
All right, Van Buren, Arkansas. The Movietown copy from maybe Dusty's Garage. There's no price tags or anything on this tape. Somehow, Arkansasian rental copy ended up in our house.
Yes.
And we have it. Yeah. And so it's New Year's Day. It's still New Year's Day. I know we took a long, unannounced, unplanned
break
hiatus from the podcast, but we're back with a New Year's themed movie.
Yes. And
it's a movie from 1995 that takes place in the future year of 1999 and 2000. So it's New Year's Eve. Most of the action takes place on New Year's Eve, 1999. And about 2 minutes, literally it says at the end of the film, we're 2 minutes into the year 2000.
Yeah.
And we are watching this film in 2025.
Yes.
So that is some weird time travel we're doing.
Right. So it was made 30 years ago, but the setting is from 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a way to think about it.
Yes.
And it was 5 years into their future when the setting of the film for them. Yeah.
Yes, which I think one of the things we do have to talk about, I guess, how this movie just flopped. Roger Ebert liked it, but no one else did.
Yeah, it cost it cost in the 40 million range to make it, and the box office was only 17. So It was huge disappointment. It was directed by Catherine Bigelow, who most people will know her from Point Break and for The Hurt Locker, because she received an Oscar for that. We love her for Near Dark. It's one of our favorite vampire films, Near Dark. It derailed her career for several years because of how poorly it did.
Yes. And it was also written by
James Cameron.
Yes, who usually, makes the biggest big things ever.
But though the production deal was this and True Lies, so he produced Strange Days, directed True Lies, and True Lies ended up being one of the top 3 highest grossing films of the year. So it's kind of interesting. One of the worst performing of the year was tied to one of the highest performing of the year.
That is interesting, and one of the things younger people have no concept of. And maybe older folks who might be listening might have forgotten, but remember what a big deal the year 2000 was?
Right.
The idea that the clock was running out.
Yeah.
Literally on the universe or something.
Yes.
Whether it was fear about Y2K, just general fear of the future, good old Francis Fukuyama's the end of history, we had reached it, then nothing else was ever going to happen, we were just going to run out of time, was this vague sense that something was going to happen.
Yeah.
The year 2000 kind of was a metonym for the future. There was a lot of Twilight Zone episodes that took place on or about 2000, so you think people from the early 1960s were thinking about 2000, and you had the Prince song, we're going to party like it's 1999, somehow there's going to be something extra heightened that's happening there.
He also says party over too, right? And that was a consensus, this feeling that the
of
world
doom.
The world was going to end.
And so this movie hits that.
It does.
In a way which, okay, that's one thing that doesn't last, though, I saw a meme last night as I was, wishing everybody Happy New Year. Somebody said, maybe this is hell. Maybe it did all end in 2000, and like the 21st century has just not been too spectacular for a lot of people.
Right.
There's that. But, Robert Hughes said in The Shock of the New, nothing dates faster than our vision of the future. And I think the argument I want to make for revisiting this movie in the 2020s is that actually this movie does not do that. Yeah. It defies that rule in several very important ways. But I guess, considering it only did $17 million in box office, it's out there on streaming, you can watch it, but nobody watched this movie. I remember renting this movie.
Yes.
In college.
Yeah.
Nobody watched this movie. So we should explain a little bit about this world and the plot.
Yeah. Well, it actually has a really good cast. So Ralph Fiennes plays the lead, Lenny.
Yeah.
Who is a disgraced former cop who's now deals in these kind of memories. And so basically there's now this thing called the squid that can record memories and experiences and feelings, and you can wear a headset that allows a person then to watch that memory.
Not just watch, but I think have a physical response. So if you'd imagine, people have sex using this thing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. People have sex, and then you feel the sex.
Yeah, they say it connects to your cerebral cortex or whatever.
Yes.
But it is on a mini disc. But anyway.
Which is, there's okay, maybe that's something that didn't date very well.
But there's a special equipment that you can wear, and you get to experience what that other person experienced. And so Lenny is now a dealer, and so he deals these fixes, these memories to other people.
And it is like a drug, and it is illegal, and you can overdose.
And you can get addicted to it.
And
Lenny is still in love with his former girlfriend, who left him to be with a famous producer at the time. And he's also, his best friend is Angela Bassett, who's just like such an amazing actress. One of her early roles. And they're best friends. She's in love with him, actually, so it's a little love triangle. And so she's always looking out for him, and he kind of gets embroiled in some bad situations, as you do if you're a dealer.
Yes.
Working, selling a legal product. He kind of gets into some messy situations.
Which I will clarify, though. He is the scumbag, disgraced cop with a heart of gold. And you get a sense of that very early on.
Yeah. There's actually,
that he's a charming rake.
This is true. And I think Ralph really knew... Not Ralph. Rafe Fiennes. Sorry, Rafe Fiennes. Rafe, he really seemed, for me, understood the character and was able to bring out his humanity. Because you only get like a couple scenes of him being a good guy, like from his past. But there's actually one scene where his friend who lost his legs, he actually gives him a memory of somebody running, and so he gets to experience running again. So he does have that moment, but he is a scumbag with a heart of gold.
Yes. And so there is the love triangle. There is then a killing. There is then, I guess in terms of genre, it's like, again, it's sort of cyberpunky, but there is also this sort of underworld thriller.
It's a film noir.
It's film noir.
Yeah.
There's bad people, but there's the kind of criminal code.
Yeah.
And as Nero is, Ray Fiennes' character, Lenny Nero, is going around making his deals, buying memories, selling memories to people.
He has a code of ethics.
He has a code of ethics. Other people kind of have a code of ethics. And you get all this information, there's the word on the street of what's going down. Again, in the shadow of all this anxiety of the clock turning, over to triple zeros at midnight in a day or two. And there's a murder, there's things to be solved. He is given basically what is a snuff film memory experience of a POV shot of someone killing someone he knows while sexually assaulting them as well.
Yeah.
And in this weird way, convoluted way, his device that transmits memories and receives memories has two squids. And so the victim is experiencing being killed by the person. And it's this like mega adrenaline rush thing. And it's very disturbing because there is a lot of... The film opens with a POV shot of a heist.
Yeah.
Of, and the person actually... Well, it's the first scene, so it's not a spoiler. The person who POVs dies at the end of the first scene of the movie.
Yeah.
And you feel him die, or the idea the wearer sees him die.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of violent things that, like, you're witnessing it as the person.
Yeah.
Who is the perpetrator or the victim or whatever. And
so this is also pre-GoPro.
Yes.
So, like, it would have been kind of very unique to have this point of
Which
view.
Which is point one of the Robert Hughes thing being wrong.
Yeah.
There's actually that now we live in a world, we have GoPros, we have a world, I mean, you can watch on YouTube super cuts of GoPro near misses.
Yeah.
Where you could just get 18 minutes of people almost getting killed.
Yeah.
From, the top, looking at the world from the top of their forehead. Basically.
100%.
Which is, and that, we live in a world of so many mini movies and little experiences, and we find ourselves in distressing situations in this device that's in our pocket, and it's just everywhere. It's like Douglas Copeland said about 9/11. 9/11 was the last major event that we don't have a million images of.
Yeah.
9/11, you think it's now, even now, it's sort of getting boiled down to maybe 3 or 4 iconic images. But if 9/11 happened like 5 years later, he said, how much cell phone footage would there be in the towers, in Lower Manhattan, at the Pentagon? I mean, we just had today was that Cybertruck blew up in the hotel, and there was like a security camera.
Right.
That you saw it. We could see the war in the Middle East from on the ground all the time.
Yeah.
And so this world of, there was even an article I read recently about, idea of maybe school fights are being driven by the need to make content and share content.
Well, and there was those TikTok challenges to destroy stuff in your school.
Yeah.
And film it.
Yeah.
To get views, right?
Yeah.
So I think this kind of, the premise of the film of like, that's what people are craving, these like views and these experiences, have actually come to fruition, right?
Yes.
Because we are like, how many, I was explaining to a friend of ours who's in 80 about unpacking videos, and she was like, why would anyone
want to watch unpacking
video? And she's actually a retired psychiatrist, and so the conversation came like it's probably a dopamine hit, like you're getting that hit of seeing unpacking with it.
And we're in a moment where Meta is really trying to make Oculus work and virtual reality work. I mean, again, you don't have you don't smell it, you don't feel it.
Yeah.
You don't get the direct adrenaline rush sensation in the brain, but we're awfully close.
Yeah,
and we are trying to do that. So this world of that, and then you have this underworld thriller, and there's double crosses, and this mystery, and who's the killer, and are they going to be saved, and the love triangle, and
there's a femme fatale in it.
There's a femme fatale in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so at the core, so the thing about Catherine Bigelow is like, with Near Dark, it is actually a vampire western, right? And this is a cyberpunk film noir. It's a crime mystery, and he's trying to desperately figure out what's going on because Faith, his lost love, is somehow intertwined with all of this, and so he knows that she's in danger and is trying to figure out what is happening.
Yes.
And so that's really where kind of the film goes. So it's, as we talked about it, as the film was, wrapping up, as we talked about it, I think if you're a cyberpunk person, it probably wasn't cyberpunky enough for you.
Yes.
And if you're a crime thriller person, you probably were annoyed
by the cyberpunk elements.
And so I think there wasn't necessarily an audience maybe for it at the time.
Yes. I mean, I think it, I often refer to things like this as the Chris Gaines principle.
Yeah.
Chris Gaines, of course, being Garth Brooks' vaguely gothy rock and roll alter ego who is too freaky for the normies and too normal for the freakies, and no one liked it. And so the Venn diagram overlap of that audience was a sliver, not a big, oh, well, everybody will love this. And in some ways, yes, that's part of the film's problem. The other part of the film's problem that I just keep getting hung up on is it is, and again, this is maybe something that Robert Hughes is wrong about, or that this movie was ahead of its time. The runtime is 2 hours and 25 minutes, which seems like that's the standard now of movie runtimes.
Right.
And you're an hour into the movie, and I looked at you, and I was like, this is the real movie now. The story has now started.
Well, they spend so much time trying to do world building around it, and it's way too much time in world building.
It's way better than the 20-minute PowerPoint that starts Southland Tales.
Yeah.
But it's a high-concept world we're living in.
Yeah.
And so it does take, they take an hour.
But even in that hour, they don't tell you about his downfall of, like, how did he get kicked off the police or whatever. So it takes an hour to build the world.
Yeah.
And you
set up what the rules are.
Set up the rules. And
get a sense of character, but even then, an hour in, you learn things about these characters that are really, 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 really important for who they are and how you perceive them throughout the film at the 1 hour mark.
Yes.
Which is, a problem. A little bit in storytelling.
Yeah.
But that's not the big problem of this movie or why it wasn't a hit, but why it works today. Yes. I think.
Well, I know this is a part of our questions that we have, but I think we do have to kind of delve into it. It is actually, so it's set in the 90s. It's set
in 1999.
But it's post the LA riots. I actually, even reading it, it was partially inspired by Lorena Bobbitt. Police
that's a Google for you young people.
But police brutality, Rodney King beatings. Actually, Catherine Bigelow helped clean up after the LA riots and was really impacted by the LA riots. And a critical component of this is that a famous black rapper is, should I give it away, I guess, is murdered by the police.
Yeah.
And so I think the audience at that time wouldn't have been ready.
Yeah. I mean, you think there are folks today who, as we had the summer of Black Lives Matter a couple years ago now, that's still a hard truth. I mean, we have a friend who is a defense attorney, and honestly, one of his frustrations is that he often catches police officers in lies.
Yeah.
And juries still side with the prosecution. Just that sense that the police in this movie are not the good people.
Yeah.
And that the heroes of this movie really are these sort of marginalized people, which I think a lot of people today can identify with because, we kind of feel, a lot of people right now do feel very disempowered, and, they might be afraid of crime, but also they do not have a lot of confidence in police and policing.
Yeah. And
that's a huge part of that movie that, you're right, I think in 1995 or 2025, there is, I think in 2025, a smaller segment of the population who who would have trouble with that premise, but it's still a very large set of the population would have a hard time believing that and knowing that these folks who are really on the margins, because again, Lenny is essentially a dealer.
Yeah. Right.
And you also are barraged with these images of, I mean, in a weird way, it sort of reminds me of the first part of Beau is Not Afraid.
Oh.
Like there is a vague sense of constant civil unrest in the 1999 of Strange Days.
Yeah.
And like just open lawlessness everywhere.
Well, also you think about it, it is very much also the like there's tanks, and so like it's the material, the
militarized policing is
that at the time no one wanted to talk about.
And in a post 9/11 context became the most
norm,
sensible thing you can do.
Yeah.
And now, we feel queasy about.
Yes.
I think, or I feel queasy about, is happening. Which, yeah.
The other thing is, so Mace is played by Angela Bassett, and Lenny are, they're an interracial couple. And the other thing about, well, not officially, right?
Officially.
She's in love with him.
You get that sense, and there's a dramatic irony to that. I mean, it's almost like, it was like the show Moonlighting, or a lot of sort of rom-com, especially rom-com series, where you get the sense you're watching these people fall in love.
Yeah.
But it's not a guarantee, but you are rooting for them. And it's an interracial couple you're supposed to be rooting for this. For this movie to work for you, you have to be rooting for Lenny and Mace to be falling in love and recognize what they have.
Yeah.
Again, there is still a segment of the population who would be uncomfortable with that, but there would be a much bigger segment of the population that would have been uncomfortable with that in 1995.
But it's no big deal. Like that's
it's
also
no
a
big
deal.
It's totally
it's
normalized.
Like these two humans who actually are connected because he was an officer at the time. Her husband was busted. I believe for a murder. Mm-hmm. And she comes in and Lenny's sitting with her son, comforting her son through the situation. And that's where they fall in love. Also, she's not an addict. She's not a prostitute. She's actually drives a limo for wealthy people.
And is trained in security and defensive driving. And so if there is a true action hero in this movie,
it's her.
It is her. It is a black woman.
Lenny is kind of, kind of slimy in many ways.
Kind of slimy and kind of like, you get a sense that he was a cop. He used to carry a gun.
Yeah.
He really doesn't want to carry a gun. He is such a... And he gets beat up a lot in this movie, too.
Yeah, and he doesn't really fight back either.
No.
Until the very end. You actually see him fighting back. But you have no sense of him being able to take care of himself or defend himself. And, Mace is there.
Mace handles it.
She's there to take care of him. And so... But she is actually the traditional
action hero
in the film, which I think people probably were uncomfortable with as well.
Also, because again, like 90s action, we talk about this a lot on the podcast. 90s action was very white, very male, very hetero.
Yeah.
The messed up people in this movie, the scummy people in this movie, are all Caucasians.
They all, absolutely.
Yeah, which, again, people, I don't know if I can deal with that. I mean, we lived in a neighborhood where people couldn't deal with that.
Yeah.
Even to this day, people don't deal with the fact that, no, there's problems in the neighborhood and they're all white, and so,
And I think even, though Lenny is a dealer, he's not a bad dude, right? He's not a bad guy, and it really is, you just get the sense of he fell into this, and this is how he's making his living. For better or for worse, this is how he's making his living.
Yeah.
And you're right. So, the truly scummy people in this are white people.
Yes.
And they're actually the people you should admire, which are police, famous record producers. These
wealthy people.
Yeah, these people
are the villains, which, again, I think is a very 2025 vibe.
Yes.
That we're feeling right now, where if you're in charge of something, you must be an awful person.
Yeah.
Which is sadly really true. Yeah.
So at the core of this film, it is it is about power. It is about race relations. It's about abuse of women. It is like so.
Those assault scenes are really rough.
They're really, really rough. And
you have to be jaded and have seen a lot of things, I think, for those scenes, and especially because they are POV shots.
Yeah.
There is an embodiment that happens to you as the viewer.
Yeah.
And in the case of the psycho killer, sadossexual psycho killers, murders that are recorded using the device, using the squid, there's great... So Ralph Fiennes' his character, Lenny, receives these mysterious discs, these tapes, which are mini discs, by the way, which is one of the audio format that never happened. The future that never happened in the U.S.
What happened in Japan, though?
It happened in Japan. It happened in Europe. If anybody's listening in either of those places, you're like, we know mini discs. Yeah. I still have one somewhere around here.
They're like, what's a mini disc?
Yeah. Everybody else, most of our American friends, have no idea what they are, but I love this audio format.
So actually, we watched this movie on an obsolete format, VHS, about an obsolete format.
Oh, that's a prop.
That's a prop.
But is this thing technology hasn't created yet? I mean, it's also the other thing you talked about is it's futuristic, but all the cars are 90s cars. All the cell phones are 90s cell phones. Actually, the squid is really the only tech device in this world.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, a little strange, but they were going for a near future. They were going for 4 years from now when they were when they were releasing this film.
Yeah, but I think we're actually...
Which is probably not very cyberpunk, actually.
Right. I think partly that's probably why people didn't like it, because there wasn't this vision of the future. Like, let's take Johnny Mnemonic, for example, which is a dystopian. It is.
Yeah.
But you think about it, like... people can get enhancements to make them stronger and healthier and things like that. You can increase your memory if you wanted to. There's those cool scenes of him like pulling up like the web and like searching through, and you see his like hands moving through.
Yeah.
So like and cyberpunk was huge in the 90s, and I think the Matrix would be the ultimate of that. Yeah. And you think about the Matrix. And just, like, how fancy it is. And, like, you could download how to fly a helicopter or how to, defend yourself. Here, it's not sexy. There's nothing sexy about...
There's nothing sexy and there's nothing intrusive about it. And there's nothing terrible. I mean, there's really not a lot of computers.
No, there's
Even
not.
as they're doing, like, essentially detective work.
Yeah.
There's no computerized detective work. There's no CSI.
No.
There's we're going to run these names through the database and see what we get.
Yeah.
There's just the squid.
There's the
squid and there's car phones.
And the squid looks like... And cell phones.
And the
squid looks like just like a hairnet. There's the squid that records...
It looks like a retainer that goes on your scalp.
Well, there's two. So the squid that records looks like kind of like a hairnet that's like has fiber optics. But then there's the squid that...
Then that's the one that looks like the retainer.
That's the one that looks like a retainer. It's just kind of like... It looks like... Almost like a really fancy banana comb. Like a banana clip. It looks like the ultimate banana clip that goes on your head. And that's where you as the receiver end of it. And that's the extent of the technology for it. And it doesn't necessarily make people's lives better, right?
No, in fact, it's illegal.
Yeah.
And it makes people's lives worse, because even then part of the conflict with Lenny is, as he is still in love with Faith, the Juliette Lewis character, part of his grieving that relationship is that he had recorded a bunch of experiences of them together.
Yeah.
And so he replays those experiences. They don't even live in memory. They don't fade like memory, because he can recall that fun day where they went rollerblading and then went back to the apartment and made love.
Yeah.
In real time, in real life.
So, and this is actually a Black Mirror episode, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Where it is a guy who is going back and reliving. His wife has left him, and he's going back and reliving all these moments. That's literally what Lenny is doing.
Yeah.
And he can't let go because Right, anytime he wants to, he can pull those
They can go to the beach again.
And you actually get the sense that's part of their breakup is that he was so into recording them and living those experiences that he seemed more obsessed with the playback than he was with the reality of their relationship.
And there was a famous record producer, and she could get famous.
No, that's,
that's true.
That's true.
Yes. So, yeah.
So it's an interesting film.
It is an interesting film.
I actually would say I think why people didn't like it again is that I don't think people were ready to talk about race relationships at that time.
Yeah.
They weren't willing to talk about police corruption. Also, just the thought of, I think it was probably hard for people in the 90s to think that we could get obsessed with just watching people do stuff.
Yes, which is so prophetic.
Yeah.
And weird.
Yeah.
And so that's the interesting way this movie is unsettling in 2025. I will say one other thing before we get to the bottom five, and that is that, again, going back to an earlier point, there was real anxiety in the world about what was going to happen in the year 2000.
Yeah.
Were the lights just going to go out permanently? Was there going to be some sort of, like... I remember talking to a friend of ours, Anthony, from college, who was like, well, there's going to be a riot or something.
Yeah.
There just has to be a riot in the year 2000.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I mean, it's so tapped into that. And we, almost 25 years later now, it's the Eric Fromm thing about nostalgia. We can, we can go to a place of certainty there. We survived the year 2000. We survived that.
Yeah.
I mean, remember being in the house in Ridley Park on that moment, the last moment of the film, actually. So, 12:02, the year 2000, and a reporter for the Philadelphia news station, Channel 6, went to an ATM and pulled out $20 to prove that money still works in the year 2000. But I had a relative who bought machine guns and horses and literally a ton of dried beans.
Yeah. And bought a secluded farm.
Yeah. Oh, it was already on the secluded farm. But machine guns, horses, and literally 1 ton of dried beans.
Wow. That's a lot of beans.
That is a lot of beans, but, when the world ends...
Yeah.
The world didn't end, and so we're here, so we can have that safety. But yes, in this way that it is much more of a mirror of our world and becomes a parable of our world when it's not a prophecy.
Yeah.
Which maybe leads to the big five. The first big question, is it camp, retro, classic, or just an old movie?
Oh, that's a good question. What are your...
I think it's now a lost classic,
yeah.
And I think it's a film that's ahead of its time.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, though, this is, preempting question 5, this is a movie that is worth your attention. I think true. Now, if you're, again, a 2.5 hour movie is now suddenly no big deal. I hate it. 90 minutes. Roger Corman said 78 minutes because then you didn't have to ship a 5th reel. A 78-minute movie is perfect. 2.5 hours. I still don't like it, but apparently everybody's okay with it. And I think because that it has this world that we are addicted to, both a kind of digital exhibitionism and digital voyeurism.
Yeah.
25 years into the future, and that I think we do have this very chilly view. Some of us have this really chilly view about the relation of normal people to power.
Yeah.
And normal people who are in normal people who are in places of authority, like happens in this movie, isn't great.
Yeah.
The other thing I will say, is one other thing I want to say. The soundtrack, they tried in the 90s to have the big soundtrack, and even the best song on the soundtrack, Selling Jesus by Skunk and Nancy, was a band too radical for Americans to be ready for in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
But y'all should listen to Paranoid and Sunburnt by Skunk and Nancy.
Yeah.
That is also a lost classic. British people know what's up with this. Yeah. Americans weren't ready. Go back and listen to Paranoid and Sunburnt.
Yeah.
But I think it's a lost classic.
Yeah.
Or at least a movie that was ahead of its time.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I feel like I believe it has a small cult following now. I do think it's a film ahead of its time. I think the themes are really, really important. The acting is really good.
Yeah.
Catherine Bigelow is a really talented director, so visually it's amazing. Yeah. It's really cool. And it's...
The mise-en-scène of the film is amazing.
And James Cameron came up with the initial idea. He and a co-writer wrote the script for it. So it's a quality film. And the funny part about it is one of the things I read, they said that one of the critiques of the film is they thought the Ray Fiennes character, Lenny, and Angela Bassett, Mace, were too highbrow in their speaking. Which, how... So, because they're poor, right? They're working poor. He's a dealer. She drives a limo. The assumption is that they wouldn't be intelligent enough to have these conversations. And so I think it's, but the funny thing is as actually some dealers are highly intelligent people.
Or, just people who are on the margins. Again, it's not just British people who are smart.
Yes. Yeah.
In fact, there are many stupid British people.
Yeah. But I agree with you that it was ahead of its time. I think people just weren't fully comfortable.
And in many ways, we are living in the future that film predicts.
And as a film noir, I think also film noirs are not always palatable to people because it is ugly people and ugly situations that often happen in those films, and I think people weren't necessarily ready for that as well.
And we talked about it a lot. Question 2, the socio-political distance, which again for me is part of the prophetic nature of the film. Yeah. We really are in that world. And the other thing to think about, if someone did not have a cell phone camera for, say, George Floyd, nobody would have been prosecuted for that.
Right.
There would have been no evidence. There would have been an official report that no one would have questioned how that happened. And we do live in a world where there's a million little movies and that you can see things from multiple perspectives and be compassionate for people who the world traditionally has not been compassionate to.
Yeah.
Because you do see them as victims of violence.
Yeah. And
official violence.
Absolutely. And I think there's a scene in the film, and so Lenny's friend is a private detective who's in the mix of this, and when Lenny does finally find the disc that Iris left for him to actually witness the murder of Jericho by the police, there's this discussion of you can't release that footage because it'll cause a riot and
the world will explode.
The world will explode, and there's this this discussion about it, and him just saying to Mace's character, if you release it, that's going to be blood on your hands because and it's just terrifying to think that that was let's suppress if something got caught on camera. Let's suppress it. Let's not get it out there.
Yeah, which, again, when there were official broadcast channels, but now, somebody would have had a squid to YouTube converter, and you would have at least got the visual.
Yeah.
And the world would just see it, or it would be shared a million times, that no matter how many times a big tech company tried to pull it down, you can see it if it's out there.
Yeah. I think for this film to come after the LA riots, and then for people to live through the LA riots, it knew the reality of police brutality and violence.
And structural inequality.
And an audience now, if a 20-something watched that film now, they'd be like, yep.
Yeah, that's how the world is.
But in the 90s, people were shocked. No, that's not a possibility.
Yes.
And so for it to be so ahead of the curve in that is amazing.
Yes. Which, speaking of curves, what about the question 3? What about the technical distance in terms of the special effects or the living technology of the film?
Yeah.
I think in terms of special effects, the movie still looks great.
It still looks really good, yeah.
It still looks great, yeah.
Because it's practical effects, right? It's not CGI.
Practical effects. It's not CGI.
It took them, I think, something like a year to actually get that first scene done of like how to get it done right.
Oh, wow.
Because the equipment wasn't, they had to make the equipment to do it.
Yeah. They had to make the GoPro. They had to invent the GoPro.
Yeah.
This thing that we didn't even know we could have.
So I think...
Yeah.
So it's all practical effects, which is really fascinating. And even in terms of, like, the squid, it's just kind of like real footage, right? So you're supposed to be experiencing it. Even in the sense, like, the squid looks good. Like, I was teasing, so it looks like a giant banana clip.
It looks like, and the player looks just like basically a CD disc man.
But
I still have one in this house.
But as you said, though, like, you know, the thought of, like, computers aren't actually a part of this in any way, shape, or form. You know, laptops, tablets, like, things like that. I think what people had hoped for 2000 to have, which we have now, like touch screens and stuff like that, it's not in the film, but actually I think it helps not date the film, because I think that vision of what, like, a laptop or a tablet would have looked like would have been really... The computers dated.
In this movie would have been beige.
Yes, they would have been beige.
Because, again, younger people don't understand this. There was a time in 1990-something, somebody somewhere decided that computers were beige. And until the iMac came out in 1990-something, until that Super Bowl ad, computers were beige.
Yeah.
You just had a beige computer, and it sat in a box on your desk.
I think...
That's...
You know, they would not have had a sense of, like, the cloud.
No.
But to be honest with you, like, the nature of some of them, of the discs that he was trading, you actually probably would want them on a storage, like
on a physical storage media, which again
because he ends up getting snuff films, right?
Yes.
So this mysterious figure starts sending him snuff films, and so these kind of illegal activities that he's sharing with others, you would want on physical media, not necessarily on a cloud. So I think in the sense of what we know about how technology can be used today, that's kind of weird.
Which I will say, in an illustration of concept and maybe a preview for what could possibly be a future episode, folks, I recently scored a VHS copy of the pre-Columbine cut of the Basketball Diaries, which has a controversial scene in it, which in the cloud you can't find, or you can't see it through official channels. But you can probably find it on a shady website. All right, so what was it like to watch this film? Question 4: what was it like to watch this film on VHS?
Oh, that's kind of funny.
I will say VHS, and then after the movie. So before the movie, there was a preview for X-Files on VHS that you could rent out. You could own X-Files on VHS. Then there was the Fox Movies website, which was a web address I don't think they use anymore. It was like, you can live in the next century today.
Yes.
Then the movie. Then the Stinger trailer, the true trailer, I guess, because it really trailed the movie, was for the soundtrack, and they illustrated that you could buy the soundtrack on CD, which I do own.
Yes.
Or cassette, which I do
not. You know, so I think I'm watching a VHS, like, if it was on DVD, if it was streaming, if we watched it on those, it would be crisper. But this is actually a relatively good tape, so we didn't get any, like, graininess or skipping or things like that. In some ways, I feel like it should be watched on VHS.
Yeah.
As opposed to streamed. But
and I will say, so it's VHS coax cable to a 1080p TV, which, you know, the whole dynamic, when that TV eventually dies, and it feels sometimes like it's going to.
Yeah.
Because it's from 2008. This podcast maybe will be very different. I don't know. Or impossible. I think that's the thing. You know, if we replace that TV, we're going to have to think about connections and buy according to what we can connect. But yeah, I think because it's also practical effects.
Yeah.
It looks all right on VHS. Because practical effects. And I think question 5, will we ever watch this film again?
Yes, I really it's actually been a really long time since I've watched it. It might have been college, you know, it might have been early.
I think we watched it in the aughts at some point.
Okay.
Because I had recent nostalgia for this film.
Okay.
Or maybe nostalgia for this film when it was only 10 years old.
20 years or so, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, it's probably about 20 years.
So it's been a really long time since we watched the film. I remember the general premise of it when we saw it. I kind of forgot. I was joking because there's you have Vincent D'Onofrio, Tom Sizemore, and the bad guy from The Crow are all in it, and so you're just like, one of those 3 guys is probably the bad guy. They all tend to play bad guys. I really enjoyed it. It was really interesting to watch it. I think I personally actually forgot the focus on racism and power dynamics and voyeurism, actually. And maybe now, because we can look back and say, oh, they got a lot of stuff right in that film. Even, the early reviews of the film, a lot of why people didn't dislike it was the violence and the rape scenes. And because the rape scene is a point of view rape scene, right?
Yeah, both of them.
Both of them. And so their point of view, and so you're watching what's happening. And
you are what's happening.
And you don't get to turn away from it. And Catherine Bigelow did that on purpose. Like, she wanted people to understand the violence that both those characters were undergoing. And just like, wow. And that kind of, for me, is just so amazing. And actually, sadly, if you watch it now and you've watched other films, you're going to be like, oh, that rape scene is actually kind of tame compared to some other films. Sadly, right? Sadly, hugely sadly. But it's a very powerful film. I think it got so much right about who we are as people. And I think because at the core, it's really like, we know private motivations, private needs, and that with fancy technology, are people really going to be more interested in porn and violence and murder? Yep, there's going to be a segment of population who are in that. And we know that from YouTube and Cam Girls and from a bunch of
OnlyFans and the dark web and all of that.
And I think for that film to predict that the future was going to be about seediness, people weren't ready for.
Yeah.
And I really like it for that. And I will definitely rewatch this film again. How about you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. New Year's. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. What a way to start off the new year.
Yeah, we'll try to do this a little more regularly in 2025.
Yep, absolutely.
Bye.
Bye.